afternoon. I will call to order the meeting of the Planning Commission for the City of Santa Barbara for January 29th. And would you please begin with the roll call?
Vice Chair Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Here.
Commissioner Justice.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
And Chair Larson.
Here. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask everyone to please turn off their cell phones and other electronic devices. It's really distracting if you're texting and we're up here and we're seeing you working away on a project or speaking to someone during the meeting via text. So please turn those devices off. I'm trying to come up with something like, or you buy us pizza, or you have to buy city council pizza, maybe them, but please turn them off. Thank you. Also today, our hearing must be done by 4 p.m. Keeping that in mind, I'll be watching the time. It doesn't mean that we don't want to hear you. It just means that we're under a horrible time constraint because we're immediately followed by another meeting. So please understand and bear with us. And with that, I'll ask for any announcements and appeals.
Chair Larson, there are no announcements or appeals.
All right, thank you very much. I just have one thing I'd like to comment on is I took my walk at Shoreline Park today, and although that construction fence is up around the landslide, so is the advertising for the fence company, and I think having that up there for years is going to be not necessary to enrich our views. I will now open public comment for anyone who wishes to speak on any item not on the agenda. That would be not on our EIR scoping, but on any other item. Anyone coming forward? Not seeing that, I'll close public comment. Thank you. And I'm going to ask if you do plan to speak to the EIR, and today we're speaking to the EIR, not to Plan Santa Barbara per se, but to the EIR that precedes it. Please fill out a green slip, and I have some here. You'll find them in the back of the room, and give them to staff, and staff will give them to us, and we will call your names. So with that, we'll open the hearing. Mr. Ledbetter, staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair Larson. Barbara Shelton, our project manager for the EIR, will give the presentation today and an outline of the hearing.
Ms. Shelton.
Good afternoon, Chair Larson and members of the Commission. This is an environmental scoping hearing for the Plan Santa Barbara Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. And this is just a slide showing the hearing procedures. I would just note that this hearing is only to receive comment on the EIR scope of analysis. The Commission will not be taking any action today on the EIR or the Plan Santa Barbara project. My presentation will cover the public comment period for the public scoping, the Plan Santa Barbara EIR project description, the EIR scope of analysis, and EIR process steps. So first, with this public scoping period that we're in right now, the public notice of EIR preparation was issued that the city will be preparing a program EIR for the Plan Santa Barbara General Plan Update. This officially starts the EIR process, and it triggers a 30-day public comment period for agencies and the public to comment on this EIR scope of analysis. In addition to today's comments, written comments may be submitted through February 13th. That would be to my attention, Barbara Shelton, at the City of Santa Barbara Planning Division, or via email, or to our UPlan SB website. And then following the 30-day public comment period, staff will consider the comments received, refine the EIR scope of analysis as needed, and then begin to prepare the EIR. Moving on to the EIR project description. The Plan Santa Barbara is a multi-year process to update the city general plan to govern land use to the year 2030. A set of Draft general plan policies have been identified over the past years with public input, planning commission review, and finally city council direction to proceed with the environmental review process. The draft policies add to or amend existing general plan policies, and they provide direction for updating the entire general plan. The general plan would be reorganized into the elements shown, including overarching sustainability principles and an adaptive management program, and policies pertaining to land use and growth management, economy, environment, historic resources, community design, housing, circulation, and public services. The initial general plan documents to be updated are the overall general plan framework and the draft policy updates, the land use element and land use map, the housing element, and the adaptive management program, with other elements to follow. This slide is showing examples of key draft policies that would be evaluated for environmental effects in the EIR. So, for example, limiting non-residential to a small increment of additional growth and residential growth as supported by resources. Focusing development within the mobility area, we call the mobility oriented development area, or MODA. Making some amendments to the variable density and policies to reduce unit sizes, height limit changes, incentives for housing, including affordable housing, rental housing, and second units, community benefit land uses, new development standards, parking requirements, sustainable neighborhood plans, and adaptive management programs. There are other policies in both the existing general plan and the proposed new policy amendments that would also be referenced in the EIR, as they would likely reduce environmental effects. This is showing the initial draft of the land use element map, and it's showing the addition of the MODA, which is the focus of the draft land use, circulation, and housing policies. So it's that purple line that's around the downtown and Upper State Street areas. Moving on to the EIR. Under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, an EIR is an informational document intended to allow decision makers and the public to consider the potential environmental consequences of a project or plan and measures to avoid or reduce significant impacts before actions are taken to approve the plan. The Plan Santa Barbara EIR will be a program EIR with a full scope of impact topics to evaluate the environmental effects of future growth under the draft Plan Santa Barbara policies. A program EIR analysis is broader. It's more general and citywide than an EIR on an individual development project. So the analysis will look at overall cumulative effects of city development and also looking at effects together with development in the larger region. The primary focus will be on identifying ways to avoid or minimize potentially significant effects and informing any refinements to the draft Plan Santa Barbara policies before their adoption. CEQA strongly encourages this type of program EIR on a comprehensive general plan update. It allows the consideration of broad policy alternatives, cumulative impacts, program-wide mitigation approaches, and also provides a basis to streamline later CEQA review on implementing actions and projects. The EIR will explain existing environmental resources and infrastructure, identify the environmental effects of growth under the Plan Santa Barbara policies, identify mitigation measures to avoid or reduce impacts, which could include refinements to the policies, additional city programs, or standard mitigation measures to apply to future individual development projects. There would also be some analysis of consistency with existing regional and local plans that were adopted to protect the environment, such as the County Clean Air Plan and City Stormwater Management Plan and so forth. And then the EIR will also provide a comparative impact analysis for a range of policy and future growth scenarios that are under consideration as part of the Plan Santa Barbara process. The alternatives will cover a non-residential growth range of about 1 to 3 million square feet increase and a residential growth range of 2,000 to 8,000 additional homes. The no project alternative looks at impacts under existing general plan policies. Alternative policies 1 would be policies for further growth limitations. Alternative policies 2 would evaluate policies for more affordable housing. And we'll also have an analysis on an extended range. It's not exactly the same type of an alternative. It's really more of an analysis of the longer term, maybe to the year 2050 and beyond under the Plan Santa Barbara policies. Kind of a reasonable full build-out scenario. This is the framework for the alternatives analysis, and as is typical with any EIR, these may be refined as the EIR analysis proceeds. The EIR will cover all the environmental impact topics as shown here, with greater level of effort on issues of most concern, such as traffic, water supply, and so forth. But it will cover air quality, biological resources such as protected species and habitats, geology, hazards, which would include wildfire, safety hazards, hazardous materials, heritage resources, including both archaeological and historic resources, hydrology and water quality, noise, public facilities, including water supply, wastewater, solid waste, and utilities, and public services, such as police, fire, parks, and schools, transportation, including circulation, traffic, and parking, energy use and conservation, and the new global climate change analysis, growth-inducing effects, where we look at housing, population, employment, and land use. So that's where we get into things like the jobs-housing balance. And then some discussion of socioeconomic issues such as changes in demographics, environmental justice, and economy issues. So for next steps, after the end of this 30-day scoping period and refinement of the scope of analysis, the draft EIR will be prepared and will then receive a 45-day public review period, including a public comment hearing before the Planning Commission. The final EIR is then prepared, and that includes written responses to public comments that we received on the draft, and it's forwarded to Planning Commission for certification, and then to City Council for their consideration prior to adoption of the draft Plan Santa Barbara General Plan update. And then again, just a reminder that the public scoping comments are due by February 13th. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shelton. At this time, then, I'll open the public hearing, public comment, and receive comments on the EIR. The first speaker, and I will request this of you. Please, if you're a single person, limit yourself to 2 minutes because we are fabulously limited by time today. And if you are yielding time, I ask that you do, I'll show you a green slip that actually did what I think is the most expeditious, which lists the main speaker and then those yielding their time. So please, or to be followed by, but do list if you're yielding time on the green slip. Once we start this, you can't yield from the floor. Thank you. So that being said, I'd like to call Christy Sursich. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Planning Commission, City staff. My name is Christy Schursch. I'm a spokesperson for the Coalition for Community Wellness. And we, as you know, are committed to a vision of really implementing health as a policy driver in the Plan Santa Barbara. I found it very helpful last week to attend the League of Women Voters meeting. presentation on Wednesday, the presentations by city staff, because as I was trying to wrap my brain around the EIR documents that I got, I didn't feel like it was actually English as I understand it. So the meeting was really very helpful in understanding a bit more what this is about. And I'd like to just say a few words about the EIR scope from our perspective with the coalition. We understand that the EIR scope will include an assessment of transportation congestion and the mitigation measures related to that congestion. And we also understand that all modes of transportation will be covered, including biking, walking, and public transit as potential mitigation measures for intersection congestion. What we'd like to encourage is that the city look at it from also a health policy perspective and really advocate for increased public transit bikeability and walkability above and beyond the mere mitigation of congestion at the intersections. The main reason for this is that the primary intersections that are congested in Santa Barbara are those leading onto and off of the 101 freeway. And we really are looking to promote a widespread implementation of bikeability, walkability, and public transit in Santa Barbara, and so not just at those intersections to reduce chronic disease and promote health and fitness. We also understand that an economic analysis will be done in the third phase of this project, and we'd advocate that particular attention is paid to the funding levels really necessary to implement this, so that the city really has adequate funding stream to support a world-class public transit system that is seamlessly interconnected and truly usable by the community in Santa Barbara. Finally, just our goal for the Plan Santa Barbara is to create a community that truly supports health, creates neighborhoods that are safe for walking and biking for people of all ages, and reduces air pollution and affords people affordable workforce housing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for coming out today. Russell Ruiz, please, followed by Diane Channing.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Good to be here. My name is Russell Ruiz. I'm a lifetime Santa Barbara resident. I think I'm one of the few people my age group who can say both my parents were born in the city, and fortunately they're still with us, living in the home that my father built 60 years ago. My daughter Stella, who's going to be 2 in March, is a 9th generation Santa Barbara local. So I'm going to have 3 generations of my immediate family living with this general plan. So I'd like to contribute what I can to make it the best it can be. I want to thank all of you for your service. I've been watching all the hearings. Nice to have the internet these days. You can do that at home. It's nice to have Mrs. Lodge back working for the city. Look forward to your contribution. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the City Water Commission, but I want to make it clear for the record that I'm speaking today as an individual and on behalf of my family. The Water Commission will be taking up the matter of submitting a formal comment to the notice of preparation at our February 9th meeting. If any of you are interested, my proposed comment for the Water Commission is posted for our January meeting on the city website. It's not my standard practice to read a statement at a public meeting like that, but I think in this forum, that's what I'm going to do. This is going to be very similar to a written statement or written comment I will submit, but I'd kind of like to see what the Water Commission is going to do before I finalize my comment. It's just a page and a half. I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes, but please bear with me. I have been following the general plan process, including the hearings and staff reports leading to the notice of preparation procedure. I've submitted comments to the Planning Commission and to the City Council on general plan water supply issues. My comment submitted to the Council dated December 2nd is posted on the general plan website. In December, community development staff and water resources staff gave a report on the EIR process at our City Water Commission meeting. My primary concern at this juncture is the water supply baseline for the water supply section of the EIR. This document is being prepared at a time that there is uncertainty about 2 of the city's important water supplies, State Water and Gibraltar. When doing long-term water supply and land use planning, making a miscalculation on anticipated future water supply by being conservative can be rather easily rectified in the future if the facts warrant it. Making a miscalculation by overestimating our anticipated future water supply can have severe consequences. Our next-door neighbor, the Goleta Water District, ran out of surplus water in 1972 and operated in a chronic water shortage for the next 25 years. The hardships on the Water District's residents and property owners was particularly exacerbated during the drought of the late 80s and early 90s. That chronic water shortage required the expenditure of in excess of $130 million to address. On our other border, the Montecito Water District almost ran out of water last year. As you know, questions about Montecito's ability to serve new development has raised uncertainty for property owners both in Montecito and in the city on property served by the Montecito Water District. 10 years ago, Montecito was seriously considering selling some of the state water allotment acquired when Summerlin Water District was merged, as Montecito thought they had more available water supply than necessary to serve their future needs. Montecito's current predicament has occurred without much new development in the service area. In addition to advocating a conservative approach in general, my main goal here and now is to try to effectively communicate with decision-making staff that the EIR baseline should not include a water supply from the desalination facility. I first expressed my concern on this issue during the City Council hearings on the desalination facility study in August. That concern was heightened after reading the memorandum entitled Plan Santa Barbara Water Supply Summary, dated August 29th, and the accompanying memorandum entitled Resources Capacity Summary, dated September 2008, that make the finding that we have a currently available supply of potable water of 17,900 acre-feet per year and a surplus of supply over current demand of 1,300 acre-feet per year to serve new development. I strongly disagree with those findings. These water supply findings are based in part on the position that we have a currently available supply of water from the desalination facility of 3,125 acre-feet per year. If you are not familiar with these documents, they are on the general plan website. As you know, the desalination facility is not currently operational. We will soon receive a final report that will show the estimated cost to reactivate the facility and the projected cost to operate it. If sometime in the future the City Council decides to fund that expenditure, at that time it would cost in excess of $20 million just to activate the facility, and the operational costs would make it by far the most expensive water to produce and deliver. Our water rates are structured so that every water user in the city would be required to share in those costs. In my opinion, during the term of the general plan update, the decision to spend that kind of money for this purpose in the face of the city, state, and federal economic situation would be prohibitive, both fiscally and politically, and therefore should not be considered likely. If there is any question on this issue, staff should take the matter directly to the Council now, before hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent on what would be, in my opinion, a factually and legally flawed EIR if it is written with an inaccurate and speculative water supply baseline. There have been several reported cases recently discussing state water and its use to serve new development where the term paper water has been coined. It is my opinion that the same analysis that has given rise to the term paper water as applies to state water allotment would be equally applicable to our desalination facility if it were to be considered part of the existing water supply baseline for the EIR. The supply does not currently exist. A substantial expenditure would be required to make it available, and there is no current evidence that the City Council would approve that expenditure during the term of the general plan update, absent an emergency, and simply to fuel and serve new development. As a definitional matter of law and fact, a water supply from the desalination facility is not part of our existing baseline condition, and the general plan EIR should accurately reflect that fact. Water is, of course, a fundamental building block necessary to support new development. We should not formulate our general plan based on a water supply source that is speculative today, extremely costly and energy intensive if implemented in the future, and would carry an unacceptable carbon footprint for a general plan that has as a theme sustainability. Other issues that should be considered in the general plan update and the water supply section of the EIR include resolution of water service to the so-called Goleta overlap area and water service to that part of the city currently served by the Montecito Water District, primarily on Coast Village Road. I'd be happy to further develop this input if given the opportunity, and I hope that through the Water Commission we are given that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruiz. Next, we'll hear from Diane Channing, please. And she will be followed by Mickey Flax. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Planning Commissioners. My name is Diane Channing, 20-year resident of Santa Barbara, and I'm speaking today as a private citizen. And I've looked at the list of for the scoping, and it's very good, very complete, very excited about it. I will save a lot of my comments until we have the draft EIR, get my hands around all the issues. What I'm most excited about in this plan is the adaptive management program. And that's what I'd like to address today is where the specifics are going to come for the management evaluations and where the public input will be. Is that going to include surveys to neighborhoods and business organizations? Will they have some mechanism to come to council and say it's time to reevaluate? So I'm looking forward to some very specific items in that adaptive management so that we can say, yes, this is going to really evaluate how we're proceeding forward with this Plan Santa Barbara and just know that we're on the right track all the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, Mickey Flax, please, followed by Naomi Kovacs.
Good afternoon. I'm speaking as an individual, but you should know that I am the acting chair of SB for All, and I think what I will say reflects their point of view. A couple of specific gotchas on page Roman numeral 4 of the attachment 3. The residential growth is referred to as approximately 3,200 square feet. It should be 3,200 dwelling units. And also on that page, the policies that are described in alternative policies 2, I believe are additive of the policies in the project. They are not alternative to. And it seems to me that's not clear. Alternative 2 would include all of the policies in the project with the addition of ones not mentioned, including things like reduced parking standards and streamlined housing permit process, but it's not limited simply to those policies. It even includes a policy from Alternative 1, which is the no growth policy alternative, in that it suggests reducing the non-residential square foot cap. That is alternative policies 1 suggests that, but it should also be part of alternative policies 2 because in both of those the square foot cap is 1.2 million rather than 2.2 million of the project or 2.5 of present policies. With respect to the extended range alternative, I think that's a little problematic. Planners usually don't like to project over 40 years out because there are too many variables that are unknown. I think what this is trying to get at is what would be build out. But the build out is pretty much under present zoning or under the zoning of the project. That can always be changed. And so the notion of being able to say what the build-out would be almost 50 years hence, I think, is a little problematical. I have heard many people, well, what I'm going to argue for is that alternative policies 2 is the environmentally superior alternative, and I think it should be labeled as such. I have heard people, some of whom will speak here today, say not everybody who wants to can live here. Well, that is indeed true. It seems to specifically exclude the people who teach in our schools, who fix our plumbing, who fight our fires, who nurse in the hospitals, who maintain our parks. All of the people who actually work here who cannot afford to live here, given their income, which is below the state median, and the cost of housing, which is well above the state median. Most workers on the South Coast, it should be noted, do work of service to the community. And maybe we should be saying instead that only people who work here should be allowed to live here. So that, with that in mind, with the notion of the fact that increasing affordable housing at all levels is the environmentally superior alternative, let me just detail for a moment what that means. It would include fewer trips into the area from north and south, car trips, thereby reducing air pollution. It would include higher downtown density, which reduces the local traffic in our streets. It would encourage development in the MODA, which actually makes the city livable. If development is limited to areas where alternative transportation and walking and biking are possible, that's what makes a city livable. Multifamily housing is, in fact, environmentally more sustainable than single-family homes. And perhaps most important, this alternative would change the focus from the way we have done business in the past with the automobile as the main source of transit. It would change that focus to mass transit, walking, and biking, made possible by increased downtown density and in the MODA areas. This, in turn, would have some impact, however small, on climate change. Reducing the automobile by reducing parking, by reducing the need to use it, is key to solving the problem of climate change. So for those reasons, I believe that that should be labeled or considered in an EIR as the environmental superior alternative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Naomi Kovacs, please. I'm sorry, I need to remind everyone about our time constraints, so I'm doing it. Sorry, Naomi.
I will be remarkably short from my usual statements up here, actually. But I do just want to start by welcoming Sheila Lodge to the Planning Commission. It's the first commission hearing I've come to since you were appointed, and I'm very pleased to see you up at the dais with the rest of our commissioners. I am Naomi Kovacs, Executive Director of the Citizens Planning Association, and as you know, our General Plan Update Committee has been very involved in this process and providing input, so we appreciate this further opportunity to comment now on the scope of the EIR. Our comments are going to be delivered in 3 parts. I will begin. It will be followed by 2 other speakers from our General Plan Update Committee. To begin, according to the Conditions, Trends, and Issues report, Santa Barbara's daily influx of non-resident population oscillates between 40,000 and 100,000 people. So these numbers indicate that our daytime population of local residents plus commuters and tourists is much larger than the 90,000 plus people who are actually acknowledged to live in the city. So this should be taken into account when the EIR analyzes the existing conditions and various growth scenarios in terms of public facilities and public services. Likewise, the actual size of the population should be addressed in Chapters 11 and 16 in their respective analyses of water resources and of road capacity for routine transportation and emergency services. We also urge you to establish environmentally sound benchmarks for the adaptive management of the various growth scenarios. The annually permissible size and number of new developments can then be set according to the progress made or not made towards such goals as improved jobs, housing balance, and enhanced social equity. For instance, the respective proportions of new dwelling units that are affordable to our very low, moderate, and middle income workforce and to other city residents with special needs. The benchmarks should help to clarify how the implementation of Plan Santa Barbara policies, which are said to underlie the extended range alternative of 3.2 million square feet of non-residential growth and 8,600 residential dwelling units by the year 2050, and how those will be prevented from exceeding the project's stated limits of 2.2 million square feet and 3,200 dwelling units within the time horizon up to 2030. Paul Hernati will follow me with further comments from CPA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hernati, and Mr. Hernati will be followed by Mary Louise Days.
Good afternoon. Our committee urges, I am Paul Hernati and speaking for the Citizens Planning Association's General Plan Update Committee. We urge that the EIR evaluate the possible environmental disadvantages of increasing the allowable density in the mobility-oriented development area. 2 examples. The residents of dense housing near increased stop-and-go traffic would be exposed to the harmful effects of increased air pollution, and the same applies to pedestrians and cyclists who regularly traverse the impacted areas. Mitigating measures such as generously landscaped sizable setbacks and other open spaces should be required in locations where densification is proposed, yet site-specific air quality measurements indicate potential danger to public health. The EIR should also evaluate the city's growth in the cumulative context of predictable growth in relevant areas outside the city. One example is that our highways and surface streets would become more impacted by increased population density in other South Coast communities and even in such more distant locations as Ventura and Santa Maria. This is the price we pay for Santa Barbara's attractiveness in terms, for instance, of employment and shopping opportunities, high-quality healthcare, and cultural events. Another example is that Highway 101 serves through traffic between Southern and Northern California. So any increase in the state's population would increase the number of vehicles passing through and motivating local drivers to use surface streets in greater numbers. And the final example, ocean shipping is predicted to increase in the coming decades and will make the air especially unhealthy near the ever more congested surface streets of our coastal city. Such cumulative traffic impacts need to be weighed by the EIR against any hoped for improvements in emission controls, the city's jobs housing balance, and alternative transportation. Mary Louise Days will now follow with the last part of CPA's General Plan Update Committee's input for today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hernati. And Ms. Days?
I'm Mary Louise Days with the CPA's General Plan Update Committee. Since Santa Barbara is largely built out, most construction projects target underutilized parcels and begin with partial or complete demolition. The environmental impact of various growth scenarios should be analyzed with such factors in mind as the solid waste, traffic congestion, and air and noise pollution generated by demolition activities being distinct from the activities of new construction. The potential adverse impact of some demolitions on neighborhood character and historical and archaeological resources should also very definitely be considered. The EIR should weigh any possible environmental benefits of incentivizing secondary dwelling units in single-family neighborhoods against the possible environmental disadvantages. In particular, the EIR should address the following: the likely proliferation of market-rate rentals if affordability and the tenants' meeting of eligibility criteria are no longer required; the likely increase in per-unit water, gas, and electricity consumption if the requirement is dropped that each unit have its separate meters; and the impact on the historically established character of neighborhoods if the current on-site parking and attached unit requirements were eliminated. And this certainly would include visual and economic impacts on some important single-family neighborhoods. Santa Barbara is special among our nation's communities. As the latest of many such recognitions, the National Trust for Historic Preservation recently named us as one of America's dozen distinctive destinations. Santa Barbara's history is integral to the city's identity, cultural activities, economic health, and physical appearance. Therefore, Chapter 10 of the EIR should stress both the desirability of continued historic preservation and the need to expand the policy framework currently proposed for the preservation and protection of our heritage. Other pertinent chapters should also address any and all likely impacts on our historical and archaeological resources. We thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Days. And next, Connie Hanna, please. And she will be followed by Debbie Cox Bolton.
I'm Connie Hanna speaking for the League, and I'm sorry it took so long to get here from where I was. The League will be submitting detailed questions for the programmatic EIR, but today I just want to mention some of the broad areas that we are particularly interested in having included. Because living within our resources is always a Central League concern, we will be asking for detailed material about the present baseline conditions of water availability and the future sources of supply and their cost. The previous speaker on water very nicely outlined the kinds of questions that we want addressed. We have similar questions about present and future sewer capacity. We have consistently supported the city's efforts to build low and moderate income housing, and we will ask for information about the possibility of doing that after 2009. Because we want to see more affordable units built, we want the EIR to consider the effects of building more luxury condominiums and the many impacts that they have on the community. We also question the assumption that people who buy million-dollar condos are going to ride the bus and hence minimize our traffic impacts. We have not seen that happen in the past, and we have not seen any studies that prove that building along transit lines means that people are going to use that transit. We're going to ask for detailed traffic information because increasing traffic and parking problems causes increases in air pollution and reduces the quality of life in the city. The proposed support for adding more second units or granny units will tend to increase both the traffic and the parking problems, even though some of these units may be occupied by people who will use the available transit. Will we have funding to increase the bus service or other transportation? Changing any standards for second units will need to be carefully analyzed. If they're not required to be affordable, then are we gaining anything by encouraging them? The League supports the use of adaptive management to see whether we are exceeding our resource capacity, but the community indicators that are used are going to be important. We thank you for providing these chances to have input into the EIR process. We hope that the public will continue to pay attention to the new proposals that are in Plan Santa Barbara and will continue to ask questions about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hanna. Debbie Cox Bolton, please, followed by Kathy McCammon.
Good afternoon, Chair Larson and Commissioners. My name is Debbie Cox Bolton. I'm the Executive Director of the Coastal Housing Coalition, which represents thousands of local workers here on the South Coast. We've appreciated the opportunity to weigh in on this critical discussion about the future of our community through the Plan Santa Barbara process, and think that overall the Policy Preference Report does a good job of recognizing and taking steps to address the serious problem of the continuing affordability gap in our local housing market and its effects on our socioeconomic diversity, the health of our economy, and whether or not we can live within our resources. We did want to make a couple of points today, however, about the report and upcoming EIR. First, we wanted to reiterate a concern that we have about the project description. Stated goals of the description, which we wholeheartedly agree with, include increasing affordable housing and making a dent in the jobs housing balance. Yet the number of residential units that are in the project description are exactly the same number as in the no project description, as if the policies had stayed the same as they are today. That seems inconsistent to us, that if the goal is to reverse the jobs housing trend trends that have resulted from our existing policies, that if new policies have been specifically designed to change that trend, that a larger number of residential units might be expected. A second point, we want to encourage the city to include upper middle income in its description of affordable, in the types of housing that is to be priority moving forward. The report states that its objective, again, is to increase workforce housing at all levels of affordability, but it stops at middle income or 160% of AMI. Even in today's historic housing slump, in December, the median home price in the city of Santa Barbara was $832,000. And a quick look at the city and county's current job listings show that an entry-level police officer and a public health nurse would make $130,000 combined, which would make them ineligible for the lower income but unable to afford the median priced home. And I think we'll all agree that we are hopefully at the bottom or close to the bottom of prices, and they're going to be going up over the next 20 years. So we would hope that you would consider including that higher income level of workforce housing in the project, in the report. And then finally, We're very glad to see that in terms of the EIR, the methodologies include both citywide and regional impact analysis, which we talked a lot about in these hearings. We think that's critical. We hope that the city, as part of the scope of the EIR, will look specifically about the commuters, estimated to be 1/3 of our local workforce, but not here living, has been mentioned today. What impact do those have currently on things like our air and our transportation and other areas, and what impact will the proposed policies in each of the alternatives have on commuters? Again, we're grateful to be involved in this process and look forward to continuing to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kathy McCammon, please.
Hi, I'm Kathy McCammon, and I'm wearing a different hat today. Judy Arias is out of town, so I am making the presentation for the Allied Executive Committee. The EIR will study a very complex general plan revision involving a number of innovative proposals, such as transit-oriented development. These have been put forth with the hope and expectation they will prove successful, bring about certain anticipated effects, and produce environmentally beneficial outcomes. However, they may not work out as hoped, and if so, the environmental effects may be quite different. In other words, the environmental ramifications posed by many of the plan's proposals will depend upon their effectiveness, and that in turn depends on the validity of many of the assumptions on which these proposals are based. As a result, the inquiry into potential environmental consequences becomes almost a two-tiered endeavor. First, an assessment of the range of the potential effectiveness of the proposal's success to failure, and then assessing the potential environmental impacts flowing from each part of that range, so we know what the possible outcomes will be. Then some specific things we're concerned about. The baseline, the EIR needs to address the actual use of public resources and public services. This includes making some estimate of the number of people living in illegal secondary units, and also our daytime population, tourists, commuters, hospital patients, and homeless. Adaptive management. The EIR should spell out exactly how this will work in relation to the various growth scenarios, and it needs to specify how it will work so the city will ensure that we do not use up our resources and our service capacity by building both residential and commercial projects that do not further the city's goals. Indicators need to be established so we'll know when we're about to run out of resources in time to go through the process to change course. As to secondary units, we need to know what policies and policy changes will apply to what appear to be the different categories. This is not clear in the policy preferences and needs to be spelled out in the EIR, because there seem to be three types: those in the high fire danger areas, citywide, and then those for the MODA. There needs to be an analysis of the potential impacts for each change in the different standards, and an analysis of the potential impacts. The assessment made of the suitability of different neighborhoods based on their unique characteristics also needs to be taken into consideration for each of the changes to the standards. And inclusionary zoning, a number of aspects of the concept need to be studied in the EIR, such as the impact of the cost of the market rate units that are necessary to subsidize the workforce units. If you increase the percentage of affordable units, the impact on the market rate units becomes even greater. Then also there needs to be an analysis of the number of service workers that will be needed for the residents of the luxury condos. Then as to the workforce condos that will be available, there needs to be an analysis of who is buying this type of housing by both occupation and family size. We hear much about the necessity of housing for first-time responders, but to our knowledge, first-time responders apparently do not like this kind of housing. So we need to know exactly how effective it is. I've gone through our comments, and I'm passing out our more detailed comments.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, is there anybody else out there that needs to comment or last chance at a green slip? No one coming forward. I'll continue with the stuff I printed off the internet that came to me as public comment, which was sent to all of us, by the way. Joe Rushin, who could not attend today, in sort of encapsulating his comments. In order to assure that this EIR best serves the democratic process to which this general plan update is pledged, I urge that the EIR abstain from analysis of the former types of questions, the potential effectiveness of the policies and proposals presented in the project. I request that the EIR avoid entirely attempting judgments on policy questions or opening, presuming, or prognosticating whether or not they will work, aside from what will be necessary to assess the environmental consequences attendant to the range of their possible outcomes. This is a long letter, so I'm just going to read item 2. Rather, I urge that the EIR focus exclusively upon assessing the environmental impacts that may result from the various possible outcomes of the policies or proposals, success as well as failure, including to the degree they might be anticipated, possible unforeseen consequences that they might accrue. And that's from Joe Rushin, member of Plan Santa Barbara Outreach Committee. Paula Westbury, we received communication from her, and also from the League of Women Voters regarding adaptive management, density along transit corridors, affordable housing, secondary units, and a lot of this was covered by a previous speaker. And there must be some way of estimating the number of existing illegal secondary units in the city, so there can be a realistic idea of how many people and units the city has in a given area before it embarks on a blanket program of encouraging more secondary units. Request that the EIR look at this on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis. Hidden Valley has a number of retirement homes, and access and egress are limited, so this may not be an area where more secondary units are appropriate. And the last is from Jean Holmes, who says, we are a hub city and many who live or work outside the city do have reason to come to the city, adding to traffic and parking needs. Similarly, folks in the city also circulate to other areas outside the city. Can smart planning succeed if instituted for one small area of the region? There was another request from a person, I'm sorry I didn't bring that letter, to designate Santa Barbara a non-smoking city and to have our air quality evaluated for pollution by smoking. So I will close public comment and bring the matter to the Commission. Thank you for everyone who did bring comment today. Okay, Commissioners. And I see Mr. Thompson's light first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to jump in here and beat everybody else. Everybody was rushing to speak here. My comments are brief. I think the scope as proposed is very wide-ranging, and necessarily so because we're dealing with an all-inclusive general plan update citywide. However, the key areas where I want to see attention focused is on resources, water, wastewater treatment, solid waste, and especially transportation. I agree with Mr. Ruiz, the earlier speaker, about the desalinization plant not being counted as baseline water supply because, in fact, we are not using it and haven't used it for years. And it's really only an emergency source, and that's even questionable how quick it could be brought online. I think we can kid ourselves by thinking that that's a source for water. I would like to see the mitigation measures that come out of the EIR be crafted and designed so that they will be applicable to our proposed adaptive management policies. The idea of the adaptive management policies is a good one that we can thank Commissioner Jostes for, but we're going to have to flesh that out. Right now, it's a concept. We're going to have to put some real numbers behind all of that so that it will be workable when we go downstream. Finally, I'd not like to see us spend a lot of time and money on this extended range alternative when we're trying to predict what's going to happen 40 years out. About the only thing you can guarantee is that our prediction will be wrong. The time frames for general plans necessarily need to be a little bit shorter. That's why the state has us update our housing element every 5 years and recommends that we update our general plan every 10 years. So trying to predict 40 years out is problematical, and I wouldn't like to see us spend a lot of our valuable resources on that. If we do it, it should be not done to the level of effort of the rest of the EIR and cause an additional expenditure. So those are my basic comments. I don't want to go into great detail because I think the speakers today did a good job of reciting some of the important areas that we need to take under consideration, and I appreciate everybody coming and doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Next, Commissioner Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Thompson's comments are spot on as far as the direction that we need to give to staff, at least our perspectives on the EIR. I do have a couple of questions and then a couple of follow-up comments. And the first one is, what is staff's projection as far as the timeline for getting a completed EIR process, certified document, so that we're back to council to make a decision?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, we're looking at a good year until we're through the whole process. I was sort of waiting a little bit to finalize an updated timeline for the upcoming discussion on February 12th with Council and the Planning Commission on the upcoming next phase of the Plan Santa Barbara work, so that we're meshing those two schedules together.
How does that timeline jive with what we've kind of been expecting all along in terms of getting something to the council in time to act on this before all of us are off the commission? I mean, and I don't mean to be flippant. I'm very concerned that we spent 5 years on this already, and we move on and make some decisions and take the good public input we've had and try to get to the fork in the road here.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Justice, I might just respond on that on two levels. One, as Ms. Shelton said, we've always estimated about a year's time once we have the scoping meeting today, and we're pretty much on track with that. We still are finalizing some of the land use distribution issues that we're working on for the traffic model, but we feel like we're fairly on track with that. However, the big bugaboo here, and again, as Ms. Sheldon alluded to, is really our resources, our staff resources. And we have a pretty ambitious work program laid out for the next year, including two elements, a map and an adaptive management program. And part of that also includes looking at the issues of density and unit size in a more public setting. So it's quite a bit of work over the next year. So we will be presenting that to you in more detailed fashion with the council on February 12th and try and lay that out a little more carefully. So that's the best estimate I can give you at this point.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to put my other comments, my questions in writing because I really want to move this thing forward and not hold it back or expand the scope. I don't think the scope can be expanded to this point. It's as expansive as it can be, and I'd like to see it focused down and be more functional. But I think we need to focus on a couple of things. First, refining the structure of the alternatives, as we had asked for in previous meetings, so that the alternatives be designed such that we can mix and match, and if there is an environmentally superior alternative, we can construct that out of the alternatives analysis and not have to go back and do the process again, number one. Number two, we have heard from the public, and I believe the Commission is aligned on this thing to a person. The adaptive management program is the most important part of the general plan update, because it gives people the comfort that we can, number one, provide for divergent approaches to providing for moderate and responsible growth, and at the same time living within our resources. And while I see this EIR as being kind of an inverted triangle with the most analysis, effort, time, and money going into environmental setting, and then environmental impacts, and then mitigations and alternatives, I think that process should be turned on its head, and the scope revised so that the most amount of manpower and work goes to detailing out the adaptive management program. Because right now there is not a lot of confidence in this whole concept of smart growth. And people are still nervous about what we want the city to be, whether it can be, and whether there's going to be bad effects along the way. And I think that in order to minimize that speculation and maximize the functionality of the mitigation program, that a majority of the effort be directed to the mitigation strategies embodied in an adaptive management program. That will do three things. It will streamline staff's ability to get this program through the review process and out the door to council so a decision can be made. It will improve the confidence of the public that what we perceive as being impacts, that we have a whole a set of assurances that will make sure that we don't exceed our resources. I'll leave it at that, but I think we really have to take another cut at this in terms of how this EIR is focused and put it where the priorities will yield the most benefit. And I think the adaptive management program is, in fact, that vehicle.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Justice. Next, we will have Commissioner White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have much to add to Mr. Thompson's excellent comments and Mr. Joseph's about the adaptive management. This is obviously one of the black boxes that we've formulated and will need to be described and brought forth to both to do its job and to part of that job being to keep confidence, to maintain confidence of the community. And I do want to add, and I know, or just add my voice to Mr. Thompson's and Mr. Joseph's, is that I appreciate we've just gotten used to a diet of top-notch testimony by our citizens, and it's professional quality work, and it's a privilege to receive it and to have the chance to review it. I particularly appreciate the comment about I call it the cafeteria approach of being able to take these different the residential and non-residential sides and be able to see what we can do to titrate them together. And Mr. Ruiz's comments about water obviously ring very true to me. We don't want to end up in an embarrassing, scary situation again with water. We've done that once in our lifetime, and that's enough. That's one too many. I think we ought to just take the extended range element out, is my vote. I think that we're talking about a year. We're talking about a large amount of money. The city is not in good financial shape. I just think that I think it ought to just go away. And those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Council Member Lodge? Or Commission Member, excuse me. Why did I do that? I knew I would do that at some point. Pardon me. Excuse me. Commissioner Lodge. I'm so used to council member. It won't be the first time, but, I'll just get in trouble. Anyway, Ms. Lodge, please, your comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also agree with Commissioner Thompson's comments and Mr. Justice and Mr. White's. I also think that the looking at 2050 is just unrealistic. I don't see how valuable projections can be made to that point. All of these things that we're concerned about, transportation, air quality, jobs, housing balance, they're all tied together. And there are those who believe that with increased density downtown, there will be less traffic. How is, and some of us have the feeling that just on the face of it, that doesn't make sense. How will the EIR be looking at these issues? And in the jobs housing balance, just the simple creation of more market rate units creates more jobs because the residents of those units require services. And even the affordable ones have some impact, not as big as the market rate. But how will that be analyzed? Can someone on staff tell me how you'll be looking at that?
Staff? Could you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lodge, Dan Giroir from AMEC Earth and Environmental. We're under contract with the city to prepare the environmental impact report. Excuse me. We will be looking at both primary and secondary job creation impacts. There are typical multipliers that are associated with market rate units in terms of job creation and service sector demands. How far we can carry that type of impact analysis out, we still need to determine, but we need to disclose and discuss the general parameters in a program EIR of how that would occur. And again, this relates also back to the some of the speakers' questions raised about how effective some of the policies are in regards to ensuring that the type of housing the city desires gets built, because changes to the variable density ordinance and programs like that are obviously key to shifting the balance from market back toward the desired unit sector that you're trying to achieve. So we'll be working with the staff on the assumptions, and I think you'll all want to see the details behind those assumptions. We heard that loud and clear at the Transportation Subcommittee joint meeting with this commission, because that's also related to housing and transportation issues. So we plan on disclosing those issues in the EIR and having it be fairly transparent what the assumptions were and what the data is that supports those assumptions, because I think all critical assumptions related to that type of mix have to be detailed so the citizens can understand, and back to Commissioner Joseph's concerns, have confidence in the analysis that it's supported by the facts.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, that will include looking at I know a significant part of the EIR will be involved with transportation issues, and that, as I said a little earlier, is all tied in with air quality and the whole community. Even things like crime. Generally speaking, higher densities go along with higher crime rates go along with higher densities. And I don't know if that's something that you had thought about looking at, but that certainly would impact the need for city services as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lodge. And now, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you. So if it's Councilmember Lodge, does that make it Mayor Larson?
No, Queen.
For the moment.
Queen.
Thank you.
As I was sitting here listening to the public testimony, I had a smile growing bigger and bigger on my face because something that I've been talking about for 2 years was brought forward by all of the stellar constellation of our citizen groups, and that is to truly address the daytime population versus the nighttime population in Santa Barbara. We often speak about our 90,000 people, and are there a few that are not counted in the census? Yes, probably, but that's a non-issue compared to the number of people that come into our city every day, whether they are tourists or shoppers or visitors or commuters here to do their job. A 50% increase in our population happens every morning and then goes away every night, and yet we have not found a good way to embrace that or account for it in our development practices. So to hear this brought forward today by the CPA and Allied and the League of Women Voters just feels great to me, and I thank you for bringing that forward as part of your platform in this process, because the more people that think about this problem and address it, the better our general plan will be. Having said that, 2 parts of our population that I continue to be concerned for are our renters. The majority of our population, I think it's 68% at last count, and our commuters who are here in the daytime, perform so many jobs and then go home. And how do we manage our commuter population? How can we be creative about that? And this is something that I hope in our EIR and the alternative section that we really give some time to, whether commuter management is having some kind of program within the city that partners with corporations and employers, car shares, models that we've seen in other cities. There are many people that have walked down this road before us, and we need to learn from them. Secondly, regarding our renter population, how can we make Santa Barbara a great place to be a renter so that people don't have to leave, so that they can choose to stay here? Other cities have rent stabilization programs. Maybe there is some form of that is appropriate for Santa Barbara, such that people who get a family, their families grow, they think I have a great job and I love my job, but I can't afford the kind of housing here that I would like, so they will move to another location, whether it's south or north, in order to accomplish that dream. But what if it was worth staying in Santa Barbara? What if they could really rely on their rent not going up beyond their capacity? What if they could rely on the public services of transportation and open space and stay in Santa Barbara instead of leaving? So that rent population and alternatives that might appeal to them are something that I hope to see in our discussion as we move forward. All of us, CPA, League of Women Voters, really give that your best thought, and our elected officials too. How will we deal with our daytime population and make it work? And then lastly, just keep moving forward. My colleagues have said it, but we have a land use element and a housing element. This EIR has got to get done, we can't really keep putting it off. I know there are many questions to be answered, but at a certain point, if you know the 80-20 rule, you get 80% there and it's time to go and not keep waiting for the 20% that might make it perfect. We've got to move forward on this. Just as a footnote to that, our economy, for better or worse, has given us a little bit of breathing room in terms of development projects coming through the pipeline. There's nothing like the cottage EIR or the other kinds of huge project EIRs that have taken up staff time in the past. We really have a window here to move this forward, and I hope that we'll be back here sooner rather than later to take that next step. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was pleased to see that the documents that came back to us are very much intact from what we've been working on so hard and so long. I think my biggest concerns as we move forward is that we have this sort of cafeteria plan on the alternatives. We need to be able to analyze all these parts and pieces in a way that they can be adaptable in the future as times change. We need to be able to equate non-residential square footage and residential dwelling units back to their carrying capacities in terms of our resources. Commercial relates to traffic, it relates to water and sewage and everything else, so does residential. We need to know how they relate to that common pot of resources so that as we need to change our directions either toward commercial or toward more residential, we can trade those resources that are being shared by both so that we have flexibility to move forward. I think also the same can be said of the project and the project alternatives. If we can somehow pick and choose between them, right now they're looking too much the same. I mean, the sphere of influence is the same in every single scenario. And I know we saw a project a couple of months ago that would eat up half of that entire non-residential in one project for that whole sphere of influence. So I'm concerned that we don't have enough adjustability built into this. And I hope that we have more than pick one out of five. Also, just in looking through the maps that are included in our packets, I'm concerned that since we saw it 2 months ago, the MOTA has drastically shrunk. Have we lost bus lines, or are we using a smaller walking distance instead of a quarter mile to the transit lines to determine those boundaries? I mean, it is really pulled in, especially in the areas, I think, where we need the workforce housing the most. And I'm not seeing what's happened in the last 2 months that would have affected it so greatly. Similarly, the same thing has done on the areas allocated for potential secondary dwelling units. I think, you know, if people are really concerned about not having secondary dwelling units in their neighborhood, then perhaps they can just deed restrict their own properties or something rather than have the whole community do it. But I doubt that that would happen. I think the thing that we really need to work on is the adaptive management tools and how we implement them. I think not only do we need to see where the bottom line is as we move forward in terms of our resources, we need to compare our performance on the new product that is being built to the existing product that's on the ground so that we can compare one to the other. You know, 99.9% of our wastage problems are with what's on the ground already. We're not correcting it with 0.1%. So we need to be able to analyze both, not just the new projects on the ground. The other real resource that I think has been maybe left off the table, I think, is the collective community brain trust. We are surrounded by universities and colleges. Santa Barbara acts as an incredible incubator with a lot of the best ideas. That's really that's our industry. And unfortunately, in Santa Barbara, if you're successful and you grow, you have to leave. So I think we should consider that intellectual property as being a resource as well that this community can't afford to waste. And I noticed one of the policies, I think it was Housing Policy 4, which talks about unit size and density on page 54. For some reason, it seems to go the reverse direction. In order to incentivize building smaller units, you reduce the density for standard units. I don't see how that incentivizes little units. Somehow I think it's worded in reverse. It really should increase the density, I think, if you propose smaller units. So it might be just the way that it's worded. But I think the parts and pieces are here. It just needs to be analyzed such that we can really pick and choose, and then with real knowledge from this analysis, then come to our determinations. It's not our job to sit here now and predetermine without having the facts in front of us, but I just hope that it's presented in such a way that it's really valuable for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartlett. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One additional comment that is definitely complementary to Ms. Jacobs' comments, and that is we have little allusions in the draft policies about transportation associated with commuters, and what environmental benefits can be garnered by improved commuter transportation. I mean, we sort of spend a lot of energy fighting the commute with looking for jobs, looking for housing in the community, but no matter which of these maximum growth scenarios we end up with, we still are going to end up with a lot of commuters coming in from out of town. What can we do to make that a less impactful process? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Justice?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to wrap up my comments, first of all, I appreciate the complexity of the task that staff is trying to address. And I think that is in part results in the somewhat generic nature of where we are right now in terms of scoping the EIR. And so in the interest of transparency, I would like to see a 3-month status report provided by the consultant through staff that tells us what specific questions each of the sections of the EIR is going to answer. And I think that will help give us confidence that we're moving forward in a focused way. It will hopefully speed up the process, because then we can focus in on us, then staff can rely on its consultant to answer those questions, and we won't go down streets we don't need to go down. And it will give us greater confidence that we're getting where we need to be. So that would be my request, and hopefully it won't require a lot of additional staff time, because I'm sensitive to Mr. With John's need to kind of balance all the demands on his time and his staff's time. But I think that would certainly get us a long ways towards being more comfortable with where it's going and how we can help it get there. Thank you.
And Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to reemphasize a comment that was made by several of the speakers about the importance of the baselines, and how, without an accurate baseline for everything, we don't have a good foundation. And I would like to add that I also if indeed putting the desal plan back online is going to, just to put it back online, is going to cost $20 million, I think that should not be included as part of the baseline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you think we need a straw vote to remove the extended timeline from the EIR? All right, would somebody like to pose that question? Mr. Ledbetter?
Councilperson Larson, before you go to that point, I'd like to address a few of the issues that you've raised, and then I would like to also turn that specific question over to our consultant to address that,
Okay,
if I
well,
may.
right before we do that, can I make a small comment?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I still request a separate historic element. I feel strongly we're 12th in historic visitation for the United States. Our historic community deserves that. And so I would like to have it separated from community design, or however it's hooked up. So please, please, please consider that strongly. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone coming out today to give their very important public comment. We all take it to heart so much, and we appreciate our educated community, which also loves to talk. So it means a lot to us. So thank you very much. All right, now back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just have a short list of items that I just wanted to underscore that we heard loud and clear, and particularly the number one item on my list here was the extended range alternative, and I would like specifically Ms. Shelton to address that in terms of what it is, what our options are in terms of how we approach that. Secondarily, I would like to just state for the record that we hear loud and clear about the necessity to have a sort of cafeteria mix and match approach in terms of how we look at the growth alternatives. I think that's how we design those, and maybe Mr. Draw could also address how much flexibility we have in terms of that. And then thirdly, in terms of adaptive management, again, underscoring the importance of that, I think staff clearly recognizes this is one of the linchpins of the Plan Santa Barbara effort, and it really is such a critical part of ensuring that we have public confidence, as well as it is effective in terms of helping us to monitor and being able to adjust our growth. And directly related to that, of course, is having a clear and accurate baseline, and we do feel like this is something that a comprehensive EIR is going to supplement all the work we've done to date. The water resources folks are doing a tremendous amount of work on updating their water supply plan, so we really do feel confident that we've zeroed in and targeted on those key issues of water, wastewater resources that are so important to our baseline. And then the last two items, the one on daytime population, that is a key issue in terms of looking at not just our residents, but what the impacts are of the influx of commuters and our tourists and visitors as well. And then finally, the status report. Of course, we'd be happy to come back to you in 3 months and give you a brief status report of where we stand. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Shelton.
Thank you. Ms. Shelton?
Yes, regarding the extended range alternative, the City of Santa Barbara general plan, planning policies and so forth are not typical of all jurisdictions. Typically, when you're looking at a general plan update, part of what the EIR would look at would be, you look at your land use map, what's a reasonable full build out over time without any necessarily a particular time frame given, but just over the long term. That's always in a general plan EIR. In the city, we don't just have a land use element designation without these other components. We have the charter and ordinances and growth management components, and so we're not, doing that typical type of analysis where we're just looking at the land use map and looking at full build out just based on the land use map. However, I guess the way we're looking at it, and a lot of this is just kind of CEQA case law. We want to have a defensible document, and what analysis do we feel in our view needs to be in there. I definitely understand the comments that are made about not wanting to spend time and effort and money on this very long-range analysis where, you can hardly predict what's happening. Things change so much in this world, even just for the 20-year timeline. However, because there are some limits to all the components of growth management, it's not like we think that growth will completely stop short at 2030. Clearly, the entire focus of the EIR is on that planning time frame for this particular general plan update, but we feel it's important to have some level of coverage on that issue. So I've heard the comments, and I actually don't think that we did a great job in communicating the purpose of that discussion in the document. I think it clearly can be a lower level of effort. It's not it's kind of a apples and oranges thing in a way. Really, the alternatives that are all on the same timeline are the real alternatives to the project. So that's the no project, alternatives 1 and alternatives 2. But the point was that we would have some additional discussion of the longer term, because there are some limitations on our growth management timeframes and so forth. There are a couple other points I wanted to make about this. Am I leaving something out, Dan, that you can think of? Because
I think, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, we heard that the desire to focus, and I think the confusion comes also trying to look down 50 years, and there's been a number of court cases that require a plan-to-ground analysis at the general plan stage. That being said, I have no desire to expend relatively limited city resources and even more limited consultant resources looking into a crystal ball 50 years down the road. I very much appreciate the direction to focus in on the key issues, because that will help me attempt to manage our budget in a way that the company is happy. So I think that we can do that, but I think to totally eliminate at least a programmatic discussion of full build out of the city, given the existing zoning restraints and your land use maps, would be problematic from a general plan EIR perspective. But I do think we can focus in very clearly. For example, should we be doing a full traffic run trying to look 50 years down the road? It doesn't make a lot of sense given the changes in transportation. So I think we can reprioritize resources, focus on what you and your commission, the citizens have said, while still meeting the legal standards for a defensible EIR by disclosing some of the longer range implications of your land use maps.
Madam Chair, the one other thought I had about that was that some of the global warming analysis that's being done now, there's a certain longer range timeline, and with all the difficulties that it's entailed there, where it may be that a few of the benefits of having at least a brief discussion or thinking through those types of implications in a qualitative way even would perhaps help the city to see, are there certain topics that we really want to be looking longer range at in terms of planning for infrastructure changes or other kinds of effects related to some of the global warming issues. And then I guess the other issue was the cafeteria mix and match.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I think on the cafeteria plan, as we're calling it, I think we've been wrestling a little bit initially with sort of an impact equivalency analysis. So, for example, what's the resource demand per 1,000 square feet of commercial space versus the resource demand for various types of units, the resource demand for a large luxury condominium versus a small workforce unit. So to the extent we can present things and have an apples-to-apples comparison in tables, that will begin to allow you to mix and match and say, again, we are getting a benefit here from an 800 square foot two-bedroom unit downtown as opposed to a different type of housing. Some resources that will be easier for, water, transportation, others it'll be more qualitative, but we will attempt to present a uniform analysis, and again, as well documented as we can make it. So I think I heard that. That's great, and then that will translate into at least 3 of the alternatives that you can compare across the board for mixing and matching policies and development types. And I think on the longer range issue that Ms. Shelton indicated, our initial research on climate change, and we've been working with the Brain Trust at the university, some people who sat on the International Climate Change Committee. And the most worrisome factors obviously are water supply and sea level rise. Those are 2 very serious issues for city infrastructure along the waterfront, for private property along the waterfront, and as well as the adequacy of our water supply, particularly post-Plan Santa Barbara Horizon, which is a real long-range planning issue to deal with.
Thank you very much. Mr. Justice.
I believe I've got a simple solution to this issue of the full build-out being put under the alternative section, and I think that its placement there is what gives many of us concern. And I think it more rightly belongs in the environmental settings section as a discussion of development trends that can be whittled down to a reasonable amount of language to give a sense of what things could be without in any way putting forth an alternative which has far greater environmental impacts than the proposed project that we're looking at, which is Plan Santa Barbara. Secondly, it can be further built upon in the growth inducement section if that's where you want to do some additional analysis. But I think the more I think about it, the more I think it may have value in terms of some discussion, but it doesn't belong as an alternative, but rather as a trend in the environmental setting or baseline section of the EIR.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. I saw Commissioner Lodge's light on for a while and then it went out. Did you wish to comment further?
The question got answered.
Oh, thank you very much. Didn't want you to feel ignored. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Larson. I know this is a public hearing only. We're not really making motions or taking action. But two things that I haven't heard back from staff that I heard very strongly from the Commission had to do with taking the desal plant out of the baseline measurement for water capacity. Can we say that that's done? Do we need to make a recommendation to Council to make that a reality?
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Oh, please.
I want to comment to the Commission's comments regarding that and just this process. This is an opportunity for the Commission and the public to provide comment regarding the scoping of the EIR. Staff will respond to your comments in how the EIR is scoped and how it proceeds. I think it would be unfair to the water supply managers to unilaterally decide today without any understanding of exactly what it will take, although I think it's clear that it would be a substantial undertaking to get the desal plant up and running again. But to chop that off as part of their long-range water supply just because of today's discussion, I think would be inappropriate without hearing further. Further, I've been looking at the CEQA cases regarding water supply and water supply analysis, and they anticipate uncertainties. They anticipate in a long-range water supply plan the need to contract for water or the need to provide new water supply infrastructure in some way. And so we're talking about an EIR analyzing a 20-year plan to assume that a water supply that, yes, it has its challenges to being back online, but it could be back within 20 years. And to take that away right now, I think, is, without hearing from the water supply managers what that will take, would be inappropriate. But I expect them to comment on how that will, what is the desal's place in our water supply plan, and that's anticipated and expected as part of the EIR.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent.
So we can expect some kind of footnote that describes the reality of using the desal plant.
Madam Chair, on that point, I just would remind you we had a briefing a while back, a few months back, from the Water Division, and they outlined the whole series of studies that they're undertaking right now, one of which is review of the desal situation in terms of its capacity, costs, energy use, all that sort of thing. So the EIR will include information about that, and again, this EIR will be kind of an initial version of the water supply analysis, and it's really going to be followed up with the official update of the long-term water supply plan. So there will be the opportunity to comment further on all these things.
Madam Chair, and I would just like to underscore both what our Deputy Attorney and Ms. Shelton said that we don't want to really presume what the water supply analysis is going to be at this point, and I think we need to give them the opportunity to conclude all their analysis and present that before we make any statements about that.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that topic, I was encouraged to hear. I've had a couple of private conversations with Mr. Ruiz over the last year, but that he has stimulated a conversation at the Water Commission to then get a wider citizen commission participation. And so in this activity, so I think we've crossed a good threshold there to just have a richer discussion about our water supply in general, and obviously this is a major topic, so I look forward to hearing that.
Thank you, Mr. White. Any other comments here from the Commission? Staff is good?
Thank you. That was very helpful.
All right.
And we'll be back in 3 months.
Thank you. Do we have a brief administrative agenda? Any Commission liaison reports? Oh, good. Ms. Jacobs?
Hang on just a second while I find my notes. I wanted to give just a short liaison report regarding Parks and Recreation. Just to let the Commission know that there are 2 new commissioners for Parks and Recreation. One is Scott Burns, and the other is Daniel Hockman. And Daniel Hockman has been active in the Creeks Commission, and so we can hopefully look forward to seeing some very good input from those 2 new commissioners. Also, they had an interesting last meeting on the necessity or decision to charge companies or, say, a body training facility that wants to use a public park as their facility rather than going to a gym. And they did determine that.
Excuse me. Could we please exit the room to have a conversation? We're still trying to conduct business. Thank you.
They did address the some proposals to charge for the use of city park space for, in particular, exercise groups that use it for profit, wherein the people are paying to take exercise in the park. And I thought it was a very interesting topic, and the Parks and Rec Commission meeting minutes are very good on it if you're interested in that topic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jacobs. And I have a meeting, a show report from the staff hearing officer, who really does a great job. Susan Reardon works very hard. She had 4 this week. I think that, and they all involved modifications. But the most interesting, I believe, was 411 East Korea, which was a 35-unit apartment that's being spruced up. And so they are redoing their parking and improving things for the tenants. And in doing that, they needed a modifications, which was granted. So that's the report for the staff hearing officer. So any other business we need to conduct? Yes. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Monday, I attended the Architectural Board of Review as the liaison for 2 reasons. First, I was asked to attend on behalf of the Valle Verde project that we've been reviewing over the years, and it's going to be coming back to the Commission probably within maybe 2 months. And they have totally revamped their plan and put together a complete master plan. It was very well received at the Architectural Board of Review in terms of the site planning components. So I think we should look forward to seeing that, and it's changed substantially since we saw it last. And then the second item on the agenda was the proposed alternate charter amendment for building heights that came to ABR. So there was a good presentation by staff and lengthy discussion by all the Architectural Board of Review members. It was kind of a mixed reception. I think they're still trying to get their arms around the intent of having an alternate, and it also started to resemble a little bit, I think, what we went through on the MPO, where it became such a laundry list of component pieces. Not only is it height, it's setbacks, it's open space, it's this, it's that, it's variable volume. You know, it started getting so complex that people felt like maybe the discretionary part of ABR was being assaulted, perhaps. So I think it comes next week to historic landmarks and then back to us as well next week. So I'd be curious, I believe you're going to be going to the Landmarks Committee for that one?
Yes, I am.
So I tried to just sit in the audience and learn what I could from them. We'll obviously have our chance at it next week, but that's coming as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartlett. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Oh, wonderful. Second?
Second.
All right. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.